Welcome to the Same Day Podcast, where we discuss driving incremental business growth and other topics related to real estate, property management, and entrepreneurship. Now, to the show at hand.
Matt Zalk here. I'm the host of the Same Day Podcast, where I connect with top business experts and real estate leaders. We recently had Keyrenter on the podcast. Kane's group owns approximately 100 doors, and they just syndicated a large apartment complex deal for another, I think, about 100 doors. Kane's group focuses on renovating and repositioning complex. If you just do a quick Google search for White Oaks, Black Oaks, Tulsa, you'll see what that really means. Beautiful, beautiful projects. We had a great discussion about the world of multifamily residential property ownership. Check out that episode that we did just a couple of weeks ago. Today's episode is brought to you by Chris Lyle State Farm. Chris Lyle State Farm helps you protect your most precious assets and investments, whether it's your home and auto, investment rental properties, or other valuables. Call Chris Lyle State Farm for a quick and painless phone call to potentially save you double digits on all of your insurance needs. That's diallyle.com, diallile.com, or call Chris's office at 918-878-7771. Today's episode is also brought to you by Keyrenter Property Management. At Keyrenter Property Management, we are a full-service property management company helping our clients buy, renovate, and operate real estate assets. And as you'll see today, we also help or handle evictions. But we help our clients build wealth while taking the headache out of property management. So no matter what rental you have, single-family homes, condos, townhomes, apartments, we have the management solutions that you need. Go to keyrenterpmc.com or email us at info@keyrenterpmc.com. Today, I've got Chad Franson here of Drives 25, who's done thousands of interviews with successful entrepreneurs, investors, and CEOs. And we flipped the script, and he's going to be interviewing me. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Hey, thanks so much, Matt. Great to be here. As you mentioned, we're going to talk about evictions, kind of a topic that's just part of the reality of property management, unfortunately. To start out, let's kind of get into how a landlord can avoid being in an eviction scenario, if at all possible. You can only control what you can control, but like during the leasing process, is there a way that you can kind of take steps to avoid that scenario?
Absolutely. So I think on the very front end, when you're showing a property, you can just look for signs that a person is not who they claim to be, right? In terms of being a good tenant. I generally like to look at things like a person's vehicle. Is it kept, in good shape? Or do you see anything that just raises red flags that you might not want to lease to that person? Kind of superficial, but also just a good marker for how they're going to treat the property they're going to be in. You do all your background checks. I think credit is the number one tell on how the tenant will be in the property. And a person that doesn't care about their credit at all is probably not going to care about your property and is not going to be worried about facing eviction potentially, but also they're not going to be interested or swayed or persuaded to pay rent by the stick that you ultimately control, which is the ability to harm their credit. So those two things, are probably the good tells as to whether a tenant is going to be a good tenant long-term and is going to pay the rent. And then running through the lease and showing them that you've got a professional lease, that you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's, that an attorney's reviewed it, suggest to them that they have an attorney review the contracts, that they know it's a true legal contract, not just something that you put together on the back of a napkin. That helps them understand that it's not a joke. You don't take it lightly. This is a legal contract that you're entering into, and you expect them to pay rent in exchange for the rendering of services, which is a home that functions, that works according to the manufacturer specification, so to speak, the HVAC, the plumbing, everything else in the house.
So let's say you've vetted the potential tenant, and it looks good enough, and you've got the lease down and the lease is signed and everybody feels good. Are there things that the landlord can do then to avoid an eviction scenario?
Yeah, there are certainly. In Oklahoma, we're governed by the Oklahoma Landlord Tenant Act, and it means that your plumbing and your hot water and your air conditioning and your heat have to work. It means the roof has to function. There are a number of things that are not governed by the Oklahoma Landlord Tenant Act, but certainly the major functions of a house have to work. And if you're withholding a repair of certain things, then the tenant is legally allowed to withhold rent and actually fix some of those things. So we don't do this as a matter of course of practice. We don't not do maintenance because a tenant doesn't pay rent, and we don't not do maintenance as a course of action, so we don't give them an excuse to not pay rent. but many landlords do. And we hear it all the time. People are moving into our properties and they're saying, my landlord hasn't fixed this hole in the roof in 6 months. And we've had this bucket where we've collected rainwater. So we have to leave. And so, tenants don't want to leave. They pay a lot of money to move, as you'd expect. I moved late last year, and it's costly. It's a pain. You don't want to do it if you don't have to do it, but they will if they're not getting the level of service that they equate to the value and that they're paying in rent. So I think certainly you want to make sure that the property functions well. You want to make sure that you're not doing maintenance, and you don't give them an excuse to not pay rent.
So given everything that we just talked about, I'm guessing people who end up, tenants who end up being in an eviction scenario are more going through an unfortunate scenario and maybe an unexpected difficulty in life as opposed to, perennial delinquent or something like that.
I think the truth of the matter is that so many Americans live on the precipice. They're on the brink. One medical setback can really throw them for a loop. Losing the job, one participant of the household can lose the job, and that can throw them for a tailspin. A child that gets in a car wreck can throw them for a tailspin. There's so many reasons. Everyone's got things going on in their lives, and if you don't have a safety net or a cushion, then one small misstep can really throw you into a tailspin, as I said. So people that have all intentions of paying rent sometimes get stuck in scenarios where they just can't. The difference between people that get evicted and people that don't are our best tenants that are late payers or are non-payers will say, I have had this situation come up and here's my plan to get caught up. Here's when I will be able to pay. And then they pay according to that plan. We don't let people go indefinitely at Keyrenter anyways and say, well, I'm going to pay on the 15th and they miss the 15th and the 20th comes around. They say, I'm going to pay on the 25th and it doesn't. We don't stand for that. But if somebody's communicating and making a good faith effort, and that involves paying a little bit, right? Even if you have a bad situation, if you can pay $100 or $200 or $300, depending on what your rent is, what you owe, then we'll work with you. We don't want to make people homeless, and it's because it's not good for us. It's not good for the tenant. It's not good for the landlord. Ultimately, the owner of the property. Ultimately, we want to keep people in properties. It just involves having solid communication and making good on the promises that you make when things go wrong.
So once you're at the point where a tenant is not paying, what do you do?
Yeah. So the first step, let's talk practicalities about the actual process. We will, send them a number of communications. We're going to email, we're going to text, we're going to call. We're trying to get in touch with somebody that's not paying. If they just ignore and disregard all of the communications that are MIA, they've ghosted us. We start by sending a 5-day pay or quit notice. In Arkansas, it's a 3-day pay or quit notice, but in Oklahoma, it's a 5-day pay or quit notice. We then we post it on their door and we certify mail that notification unless we hand it to somebody, an adult at the property. After you do that, if there's still no response, you go down to the courthouse, you file the forcible entry and detainer. It's a small claims court action, and you file all those documents. You pay $58, which amounts to a bunch of different fees and other things. And then you decide whether you want the sheriff to post the notice or whether you want a private process server to post the notice. If you have the private process server post the notice, you pay another $50, $75 for a private process server to do it. If they hand the notification to the person, that's it, you're done. If they post a notice because the person's not home, you also have to send that notice certified to be valid service. And then ultimately you select a date at which you're going to, the judge is going to hear this case. Now, in today's world, this didn't used to be the case, but low-income tenants have legal representation from an organization in Tulsa called Legal Aid. And so they get pro bono legal representation, and that attorney will come out. They will actually do an intake form. They'll do an intake with that tenant. They'll kind of get the situation. They'll understand what's going on. Then they'll come out and talk to us as the landlord, and they'll say, can you give us a break on this or that? Or they'll try to threaten us by telling us things like the fees we've charged are borderline usurious and all sorts of other nonsense. Just to kind of scare us. But nonetheless, we might work with them a little bit. We might do a judgment under advisement, which means that we've agreed, here's a payment plan. As long as the tenant sticks to that payment plan, we're willing to not, put this on the record forever. And if they don't make that payment plan, we go back to the judge and we say, Judge, this payment plan was failed or it has failed, and therefore we get the execution of the judgment for possession of the property. So that's basically it. If they don't show up, we get we get a judgment for possession of the property. Then we wait a couple of days for the judge to execute that document, put it online. Then we've got to mail that paperwork to the tenant themselves. Then we've got to go down to the courthouse. We've got to pay another $50, fill out a bunch of forms for the sheriff to actually, it's a writ of execution actually, and the judge has to sign that one again, and then they have to send it down to the sheriff's office. The sheriff has to post a notice of a 48-hour notice to vacate the property, and then they go back after 48 hours and they'll lock the doors, giving us possession finally of the property. So all that is can be condensed into 15 or 20 days, and it's not necessary that it takes 2 months, but there are a lot of steps, and if you do it wrong, then the judge will either throw out the case, dismiss it summarily, or might say you need to refile as an alias, certify notice again, post service again, and send it certified, et cetera, et cetera. So there are certainly a lot of different steps, and things can go wrong along the way if you don't do it by the book.
So, given all of that, what does that mean for the landlord? You know, from a financial perspective, or just a enjoyment of life perspective with regard to that property?
Yeah. So from our perspective, we let the landlord know that we're trying to make communication. We're trying to make get in touch with the tenant, and then when we're not able to, we send them just a quick update saying, "Hey, we haven't been able to. We're going to post. We're going to submit the FED, the forcible entry detainer, the eviction, and then we kind of keep them posted along the way." Realistically, it probably means they're out a month of rent or half a month's rent, but hopefully we've got the security deposit that will cover that, so we don't have actual lost income. And then, in the final days before we do the sheriff's lockout, we often post the property for rent again. And so in the case of, in the best case scenario, we may evict them on the 15th or the 18th. And then because we've put the property on the market again on the 15th or 16th, we may have somebody actually lined up for the first of the next month. And if the property is not damaged, then we've got the security deposit that covers that month's rent, and then we move on kind of down the road. If there are damages and we had 2 months of security deposit or 3 months of security deposit, that's also a great thing. Doesn't always happen, but it certainly can. I will say that the most frequent scenario for this is in low income housing. And so when people are exploring, do I buy a $200,000 house that rents for $1,600? Or do I buy a $50,000 house that rents for $1,000? Right, the yield on those assets are very, very different. One is, what did I just say? 1,500 over 2,000 is essentially 75 basis points per month on the asset every month, and the other is 2% every month. Well, you have to understand that the reason you're getting way more in rent as a percentage of the total of the asset value is because you deal with volatility in that tenant demographic, and so you're going to get 2% each month for 8, 10, 12, 24 months. And then you're going to lose 2 months because the tenant's not going to pay ultimately. And you're going to have to evict them. And then you have to do some repairs. And then you got to put it back on the market. But that is the difference when people ask, what property should I invest in? And they ask, us as Keyrenter all the time, we say, you can do this high yield investment with greater volatility and greater risk, or you can do this lower yield investment with lower volatility and lower risk. And that's just the decision that you make. Do you have the stomach to ride the market, ride the wave, or do you want stability?
Is the let's say you reach an eviction process in a lower yield property, is it just as complicated? Often?
It's just as complicated. It might be more complicated because the person, though they might not have legal aid, the free pro bono legal resources for the penurious, they may have a brother or uncle that's an attorney. They may try to do different things. But ultimately, if you don't pay your rent in Tulsa County and in most of the counties that we work in Arkansas and Wichita, Kansas, in Oklahoma City, you're going to get pushed out. It doesn't take that long to get somebody out, unless there are all sorts of extenuating circumstances, which is very, very rare.
Is there anything else a landlord should keep in mind with regard to the eviction process or complications he or she might face?
It reminds me a little bit of doing a DIY project at your house. If you want to fix a wall that termites have eaten, you can do it. It's not hard to frame a wall, but you need a miter saw and a skill saw and a table saw and a this and a that. You need a new hammer, one that actually, does the job for tough lumber. You need a nail gun. You need a whole bunch of stuff. If you want to invest in all of that, you certainly can, and you can go on YouTube and you can see how you frame a house or a wall. Ultimately, if you just pay somebody to come over to your house and frame the wall, it's much easier. You'll save a lot of heartache and headache, and then you won't have all these tools sitting around your house for the next 20 years that you do nothing with. So I liken it very much to that. You can pay somebody to do the eviction, and that can be us, that can be an attorney, and we don't make money on the evictions. We pass them through sometimes to an attorney. We do many of them ourselves. And it's either way, it's at cost to our client, the property owner. You can also, do it yourself. You just have to learn all of these skills, and you doing it the first time there'll be a significant learning curve. Talking to the bailiff, you're not going to be, super happy. Talking to the court clerk, you're not going to be super happy. And talking to the judge will make you very nervous. Whereas in our case, today I represented Keyrenter in an eviction, and the judge said, you haven't posted this certified. And I say, Your Honor, with all due respect, this is the same situation we had last week where you told me I didn't post it certified, and it was there on the OSCM, the Oklahoma court website. So I just pulled it up on my computer and I showed it to her, and she said, by golly, you're right. So, would somebody else have the same ability to do that? I don't know. So you can it's the 60-pound tomato, it's framing your own wall. You can invest in everything you need to do that. And if you want to do it once, it's probably a wasted investment. If you want to do it 100 times, probably a worthwhile investment. Alternatively, you can just hire somebody else to do it, whether that's Keyrenter, another property management company, or directly hiring an attorney that will handle it for you.
Last question for you. When I think of property management, I think, a lot of cleaning, leasing, turnover, maintenance, things like that. I don't really think of eviction, but that's a huge part of it. Is that the most draining or stressful part of your job?
You know what? The most draining and stressful part of our job is probably make readies, because we want to do them super fast, and we want to put money back into the owner's pockets. And that can be a ton of work in a very concentrated period, especially when, all of our unit turns are between, call it April and August. So we have the beginning of the month is a heavy lift on our maintenance team, on our inspectors and everything else. I would say that provokes more anxiety in me and in the team than evictions. Evictions are just kind of, I think, par for the course. You're gonna lose some over time. As good as your screening is, you're just gonna have people that fall in hard circumstances and stop paying rent, and that's just part of it. The more controllable thing, in my opinion, is doing make readies in a really speedy way, so that owners' properties get back on the market in 5 or 10 days and are leased by the time they ultimately are made ready and are in good shape again. So that's the one I think is, to me, we focus on more in terms of improving process and speed and efficiency, so that we can really put money back in our owners' pockets.
Okay. Hey, Matt, it's been great to talk to you today. Very interesting and informative. Thanks for having me.
Chad, thank you. Appreciate you being here.
So long, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Same Day Podcast. Tune in to a new show each week and be sure to subscribe to get future episodes.